Welcome to episode 119 of the How'd It Happen podcast, hosted by Mike Malatesta. In this episode, Mike welcomes Brian Bogert, a passionate performance coach, philanthropic leader who believes in helping growth-minded individuals achieve the best version of themselves, their most authentic selves.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am super excited today to have Brian Bogert with me. Brian is someone that I am meeting for the first time today, but I came to know a little bit when I heard him on David Meltzer's podcast. And I don't remember which one because Meltzer does a few different podcasts, but if you haven't heard of David Meltzer or you haven't listened to him, I recommend you do. And being on his show is a big deal. It's like he's a big deal. And so when I heard Brian, and I heard Brian talk about his story, and which I'm sure he'll get into with us, but it was just like I was just so impressed by, not only the energy that he has about his life, but the pivots that he's made in his life, and particularly what he's doing now. And so I reached out and said, hey, let's connect on LinkedIn. And then from LinkedIn, we came to this. So Brian, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm so happy to have you here.
Mike, thank you so much. Pleasure's all mine. And I will just echo what you said. Anybody who's not following David Meltzer, go do it. He's a phenomenal man. He's become a friend and a mentor. And I consider it a blessing to have been a guest on a couple of his shows, actually.
Oh, you have? Okay.
Yeah. And so you may have heard me on one of many of the platforms that he does. You're right. He has many. And so I'm just totally grateful to be here today with you, Mike.
Great. Yeah, I don't know how he does it. It's like every day there's stuff and it's just so much, but I like it. I like consuming it. I just don't know if I could do it. Anyway, let's get started, Brian. I ask everyone the same question on my show to get us started. How did it happen for you?
Yeah. So I want everybody who's listening to just close their eyes for 1 second. And I want you to imagine walking out of a store after a successful shopping trip and heading to your car, turning your head and seeing a truck barreling 40 miles an hour right at you with no time to react. That's where this portion of my story begins. My mom, my brother, and I had gone to the store to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to the car, you said it before, my energy, right? I've always had a large amount of energy and a vigor and excitement for life. So it wasn't surprising to my mom that I was 3 or 4 feet ahead of them, got to the car first because I wanted to get home to use that 1-inch paintbrush. My mom and my brother were few feet behind me, and I was standing next to the car waiting for her to unlock the doors. And as that was happening, a truck pulled up in front of the store we'd just walked out. Driver and middle passenger got out. Passenger all the way to the right felt the truck moving backwards, so he did what any one of us would do. Moved over to put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Combination of shock and force threw him up onto the steering wheel, up onto the dashboard, and before you know it, he was catapulting 40 miles an hour right at us with no time to react. We were in an end spot. And so he went up and over the median in the end spot, went up and over the tree, hit our truck. And we think I was holding onto the handle of our car because it yanked me down to the ground, and the truck proceeded to run over me diagonally, basically tear my spleen, leave a tire track scar on my stomach, and continued on to completely sever my left arm from my body. Oh. So there we are. It's August 10th, 115 degree day in Phoenix, laying in the asphalt, which is another 10 to 15 degrees of heat, with my arm 10 feet away. And my guardian angel fortunately walked out of the store right when that happened. She saw the life and limb scenario in front of her, rushed over, saved my life by stopping the bleeding, and also simultaneously instructed some other innocent bystanders to run inside to the store, grab a cooler, fill it with ice from the convenience center so that my arm would be on ice within minutes. Or I might not be alive today, or I might not have an arm today if it wasn't for this woman. And so I know that a lot of you weren't expecting it to go there today. And I'm going to expedite this portion of the story. But what I've learned is that, yes, I have a very unique story, but we all have our own unique stories. What's important is that we pause and become aware of the lessons that we can extract from our stories, and then become intentional with how do we apply those into our lives. And how do we become intentional with applying those and tapping into the collective wisdom of all of our stories so that we can shorten the curve to learning for all of us. So I learned 2 primary lessons through this experience. The first was I learned not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but get moved by what I could do with it. And the second, I didn't realize until far later. You see, because the unrelenting and unceasing nature of the surgeries, recovery, physical therapy had me in a fog, but my parents certainly were not. And witnessing them and the hours upon hours of discomfort and sacrifice they made to ultimately strengthen me is what ingrained this lesson. So whether intentional or not, what they really ingrained in me was a philosophy and way of living, because I learned to embrace pain to avoid suffering. And when this is done properly, you also can gain freedom. And so it's this concept that I use to not only overcome this unique injury, but how my business partners and I built our last business from $250,000 in revenue to over 15 million within the span of a decade. And how I've helped hundreds of individuals and organizations just like you become more aware, more intentional, and more of who they already are, their most authentic selves. Because that's when the door begins to crack to perspective, motivation, and direction.
Okay, that's a bomb to drop. So did you see the truck coming? Do you remember? I mean, I'm not sure how. That's very traumatic. I don't know what.
I don't remember that day at all.
Okay.
I will tell you that my mom has mentioned that she has vivid memories of seeing the truck coming at us and having no time to react. But it happened that fast.
And what was the first time you remember waking up or being aware of something after that, Brian?
I was in the hospital, and I don't remember if it was the same day or if it was a couple of days after, because it was pretty foggy.
Yeah, sure.
Really, what I remember is feeling like I was in a dream and feeling like this wasn't real and like I had just imagined all of this. And I was just waiting to wake up, which never really happened because I was awake.
Right.
So it was one of those things where, it's just so strange, so rare, so traumatic. It's one of those things that doesn't sit in right away. And I was a 7-year-old, right? So
sure.
I had a level of awareness, but I was also in a position where I was young and not really kind of understanding and being reliant on my parents. And then the second thing I remember is all of the families who came over to visit us in the ICU, who were also in the ICU, who were saying, "We are so sorry. Anything we can do to help, please let us know." And then come to find out that their kids are laying in the bed next to me with a terminal illness and don't know if they're going to live for 3 more months. I didn't know whether or not I would have my arm ever, right? It was too early in the recovery process to even know if the reattachment was going to be successful. But what I had was my life. And so what I remember very vividly is the perspective that I gained right away, because it snapped me out of the easy place to fall into, which is feeling sorry for yourself in a scenario like that.
Yeah, naturally.
It allowed me to shift more into, like I told you, learning not to get stuck by what had happened to me, but get moved by what I could do with it.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, whether or not I had my arm, whether or not I was going to have my arm, was irrelevant at that point, because I was going to be able to be happy, healthy, and productive and live a full life because I had my life.
How long were you there, Brian?
The first visit I was there for about 2 weeks. And then I was in and out of the hospital over the course of the next 6 years for another 20 plus surgeries over that period of time for a massive amount of reconstruction and recovery, so that I can be here today, right, and use it in full practical manner.
It's amazing.
It really is.
When did you know that it was going to be successful?
It was about 4 months after my accident. We had gone in for a nerve surgery, a nerve reattachment surgery. Now, I was blessed because I had a physician at the time that really understood that this wasn't going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 surgery ordeal. He knew this was going to be a 15, 20, 25 surgery deal. And so in the very, very first surgery, like as he was reattaching my arm, he went in with laser precision and flagged and tagged veins and nerves and different pieces, because he knew that over the course of how the body would heal, they would be unidentifiable.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so he was able to actually have the vision to know that that was the case. So when he went in to do this nerve surgery, it was a 19-hour surgery. He took one break to go to the bathroom and to take a handful of M&Ms. And other than that, he stood by the table to do this procedure. And we didn't know, right, what would happen, because nerves are kind of like a rope. There's a whole bunch of different fibers, and you can try to line them up, but you really don't know when you're reattaching the nerves. Like, am I lining up the fibers so that they're going to fire and work exactly as they should? beautiful thing is our brain has the ability to reprogram a whole lot, not necessarily 100%. And so the moment that I realized that it was going to be worthwhile was about 4 months after that surgery, because I remember wiggling my fingers for the very first time. And I remember having the first moment of feeling, like legitimate feeling, not phantom pains, not phantom feeling, but actual put a finger on my hand feeling, about 4 months after that surgery. And it was that moment that my hope was restored, that I had vision and belief that I was not only going to be able to feel and just wiggle my fingers, but would be able to go down the path of really embracing the pain necessary to avoid the suffering of not ever being able to use my arm again.
And when was it that you felt like a kid again? Because it's hard to feel like a kid when you got all that stuff going on.
That's a really good question, and nobody's ever asked me that. I don't know that I ever did. I think that it forced me to grow up in a whole lot of different ways. Now, that's not to say I didn't have a childhood or I didn't have experiences, but inherently my experiences as a child were just different, right? My parents, especially in the first couple of years of recovery, between 7 and probably 12, I was in and out of surgery so often that there was just so many physical things that I wasn't doing. Now, they were always very wise to recognize that I've always had a really high rush threshold and I'm going to do stupid stuff to feel alive and kind of push myself there. And so they tried to keep me in the boundaries as best they could. But it honestly, when you have an experience like that at that age and you start seeing friends that you met and were growing up with in the hospital starting to die,
right?
Literally, by the time I was 8, 9, and 10, I'd already lost multiple friends that I'd made through the healthcare experience because their illnesses got the better of them. And so that immediately puts you into a position where you're just more grown up.
Yeah, you're growing up in a super accelerated and strangely traumatic way.
Yeah, and I think because of that, right? This is another part of my journey is that I created a narrative that I was okay, that I didn't need anybody's help. I didn't want to be the victim. I didn't want to be the center of attention. And I wanted to make sure that I could help other people wherever possible. And I didn't need the focus on me. Like, so what if my arm got ripped off? Like, I'm good. I'm fine. Like I can do this. Right.
Right.
And fast forward until when I was 20, and then I re-broke it again snowboarding, almost lost my arm again at 20. And I re-experienced a whole lot of things that I did as a 7-year-old now as an adult without the same support system around me. But what I realized is that world bought into the narrative that I'd created. And so I forced myself to grow up. Part of that was I calloused myself, forced myself to be tough, not vulnerable, right? Not in a position to be able to ask for help. And now all of a sudden when I needed help as an adult, the world had bought into my narrative and I didn't have the strength or courage at the time to ask for the help I needed then. So I had to re-experience all of this stuff and relearn a lot of those experiences. And so I don't think I ever really went back to becoming a kid again, but I definitely as a 20-year-old experienced probably some of the emotions that I experienced as a younger kid in the process and evolution. And that was a really major pivotal turning point for me in my life because I realized we can't do anything without other people. And so the next period of my life really shifted from not just protecting myself and creating this narrative and image that I can do anything, handle anything, break through barriers, right? I never wanted to be limited based on what people saw. So I just did stuff, right? Water skied and played sports and like, it just was what it was. Now all of a sudden it's like, I need to focus on people. And I really turned into authenticity and vulnerability and how do I connect?
I got like little tingles when you said, like callous your mind or whatever, because it reminded me of David Goggins' story.
Oh, yeah.
His book, callous your mind. And then I was thinking to myself, as you were saying, I was like, man, I wonder what Goggins does if he needs help. Because, he set the bar pretty high on like, I can do whatever, sort of like what you were doing.
He did. And so I'm going to caveat this with one thing. I love David Goggins. I loved his book. I loved his message. And I think what's really interesting is if you listen to or read the subtleties in his story, he actually comes full circle towards the end, towards the need to be vulnerable, towards the need to be like, yes, we can callous, but if we callous and we don't stretch, if we callous and we don't do the right things around our body, like we ultimately are driving ourselves into the ground.
Right. Relationships too.
100% relationships.
He calloused his way through all his relationships until that just doesn't work.
Interesting, because as I started listening to the book, like I identified deeply with a lot of his concepts. But the part that was missing for me was that human element, that softer side, because I learned the hard way. When I shut off pain, right? Physical pain, I shut off emotional pain, right? And the reality of it is what I just had told you. I didn't realize this until even a few years ago. So this was much later than my last injury, right? If we don't feel, if we don't have emotion, human connection without emotion is not human connection. I'm a big believer in the power of the mind, and we can set ourselves up to do just about anything with intellectual prowess, callousing the mind, focusing, like just laser focus on what we do. But if we don't bring our body back into it, the feelings and the emotions, it's like an inch deep and a mile wide. And so that's what I struggled with listening to the book until the very end. At the very end, he cracked that door, and he didn't go deep on it. And I don't think he had to, right? I thought he did a phenomenal job of really helping people see that like we're capable of so much more than we can give ourselves credit for.
Right.
That we have in life are really the limits that we place on ourselves.
They're our limits, right? Yeah.
He did a phenomenal job of highlighting that, and he lives that. So I'm a huge fan of David Goggins, but that's the interesting part is I think most people picked up on the callousing of the mind part. But what he really is also saying is we need the softer side also. And he learned that the hard way also is how I read the book.
Huh. Okay. I like that. Yeah. I don't know that I got that because I was just so fixated on the hardcoreness of him and looking at myself and going, almost like a wimp, like, come on. Yeah.
I mean, he's a beast. He's an anomaly, right? Like truthfully, he does stuff that most people probably aren't capable of, and that's okay. But the point is like, what are each one of us individually capable of? And I guarantee you, it's more than what we think we are.
Yeah. And I think
with him, because I like to live with no limits. And that's one of the things I do in my coaching is helping teach people to live with no limits, right? Live well beyond the boundaries we've set for ourselves.
Yeah. I'm excited to get into that. And but even him, 4,000 or whatever it was, pull-ups that he had to do. I don't know that he thought he could do it. He was just like, well, if I do 10 and then rest for the rest of the minute and then start again, and everything is in increments of small chunks, right? It's not 4,000, it's 10. I only have to do 10, right?
And it's the small, incremental, consistent things that we do that lead towards success and compound over time. And he understood that concept.
So I want to congratulate you on that visual that you gave us for nerves with the rope. So I'd never heard something like that before, but as you were talking, it was easy to picture a rope, a frayed rope, and then like how would you put that together? And you can't duct tape it or use that was really good. So thank you for that. Stupid question here, but do you remember what you were going to do with the paintbrush when you got home?
Yeah. We were going to finish up some edging for painting in a house that we were just moving into. So
okay.
We had done everything, right? But it's like anything, like any one of us that goes to the store thinking we're super prepared, any home project, right? You go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, whatever it is, and inevitably you forget something.
Yeah, there's that one thing, right?
Forgot the 1-inch paintbrush that we needed to finish the trim and all the edging in the room. And so that's what we went and got. And yeah, obviously we didn't end up painting that day. So
got put on hold just a little bit. Yeah. Well, good reason. I'll tell you. What about the guardian angel? Do you have a relationship with her? Did you meet her afterwards? Or?
I never have spoken to her.
Oh, is that right?
In every show I've ever done, anytime I've ever told the story, I've always, if anybody can help connect me with her, I would love the opportunity to just say thank you, because I wouldn't be here today without her.
Right.
She was truly a guardian angel. She swooped in, saved my life, saved my arm, and swept out with no credit, no acknowledgement, no recognition. And I don't think she even realizes that the impact that she's had in my life. And if I wasn't here, I couldn't impact other people's lives. So, she gets a lot of that credit, and I'd love the opportunity to meet her.
Okay. Well, if you are listening, or if someone is listening that knows this guardian angel that with a story that you can never forget, right? She told you this, you'll never forget it. Brian is the person. So connect with him. Because that would be really neat to kind of...
It would be.
Right? I mean, there's a debt there that you probably feel like you need to repay.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I don't necessarily think about it in the terms of debt, but you're right. A lot of people have asked me, well, Brian, why do you do all the stuff that you do? Why do you do these things? And I feel like it's my responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm drawn to it, right? I'm very interested in it. I love the work that I do. But a lot of the stuff that I do is also because I can. And because I can, I want to. And I want to be able to do that. I'm here happy, healthy, and productive with a story and many elements of success that have been built up in professional and in community, right? That are ways that like wouldn't have existed. And if I don't do the things that I do, shame on me, because I'm in a position to provide perspective, motivation, and direction to other people. And
Right.
I've been given a gift of my life because of this wonderful woman. I feel like I need to.
Yeah, and you're right. Debt's probably a bad word. Like appreciation or something like that is probably
Gratitude.
a better word. Gratitude. Yeah.
So she should have just walked to her car and gotten in her car.
Well, yeah, it's easy to ignore that kind of stuff, right? I mean,
she literally could, and this was before cell phones, right? So she could have just gotten in her car and went about her day.
Right.
For the ambulance to get there. But here's the really ironic part. The first ambulance that got called got into a car accident.
Oh, no way.
So in a pure emergency situation, had she not acted, had she not taken action, had like fear gotten in the way, had anything gotten in the way, or like her own world, I wouldn't be here today.
Yeah, you'd be dead. Yeah. Huh.
So I think about that often. And, you know, that's honestly one of the things I tap into when I hesitate to take action on something. Had she hesitated to take action,
yeah, okay, yeah.
So there's a pretty powerful story there where it's like, just take action.
Yeah. Well, David Meltzer says that all the time. If you can do it now, do it now.
That's right. There's nothing, I mean, ideas without action are just ideas, right? And there's so many things that people have been sitting on and have said, oh, I want to be doing this, or I could have done this, right? Well, then do it. Just take action. The worst thing you can do is fail.
So when you talked about a little bit about, you know, in your 20s and you're snowboarding, you're doing all of these, you know, quote unquote normal things, the things that people with out the challenges that you had do. What's going on in the rest of your life, Brian? When you're in school, you're going to college, or you're in high school, going to college, what are you thinking about your future at that point, or are you thinking about your future?
Oh, I've always thought a lot about my future. You know, and I don't know that I really had like a crystal clear vision of it at the time. It certainly wasn't to do what I'm doing today. But I will tell you that I've always had an entrepreneurial bug. I started my first business when I was 12. I was picking up dog poop in the neighborhood, which then by the time I was 13 and a half, I had somehow convinced all of my clients to let me do their landscaping. So by the time I was 14 or 15, I had 40 clients in my neighborhood where I was working all day, every day on the weekends and in the evenings, cleaning people's yards and doing stuff because I wanted to put myself in a better position to succeed.
Was it a money thing that you wanted, or was it something else?
You know, I don't know. I think it was both. I think there was an element of money because I wanted stuff, right? And I mean, I wanted to buy things and I wanted to put myself in a position where I could buy my own car and have savings and have pride. And but I, you know, truthfully, I don't think it was all about the money. I think that I just really liked to get my hands dirty and work. And I'm not somebody that sits still very easily. And I think because I was forced to grow up so quickly, I think it also was very natural for me to just start working and doing stuff that I felt like I could be helping people while getting compensated for it. And so I was doing that. I went to school. I got a Bachelor of Science in Business and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology. And the biggest reason is because I was just always interested in business and always interested in people. And so it was actually really interesting how much those two things have complemented themselves throughout the rest of my career. And when I was in college, all I knew was that I wanted to go get an internship, right? I wanted to get some business experience. And so between my sophomore and my junior year, I reached out to a family friend that I had no clue how successful he was. He was just always somebody I viewed as a business mentor. And I literally went to him with a resume and I said, hey, I just want to pick your brain on how to interview for these positions. I'd lined up 5 or 6 different interviews. And when I went to talk to him, I wasn't interviewing. I was just having a conversation. By the end of our hour together, he said, I'm going to pass on your resume to X, Y, and Z within our firm. Well, come to find out, he was the president over the entire Western region for an $800 million firm, right? Back in the early 2000s. So it was a big company and he was a pretty major player. And I fell in love with it. So I ended up doing that through the rest of college and then landed into risk management, employee benefits consulting. And that's where I spent the first 15 years of my career.
Okay. And you spent 15 years. So this is interesting to me because you spent 15 years there. As I understand it, you got involved in, sort of a group within the company, the Locked-In company, right? And then, and you're doing well. Like, this is the kind of job, it sounded like from hearing you talk about it, it sounded like something that most people would be this set with it. If not set because they are passionate about it, set because of the risk or of losing the lifestyle, that kind of thing. So, and I think that holds a lot of people back from becoming entrepreneurs. So there's the people that just don't think they can do it. And then there's the people who think they can do it, but geez, starting over now, I got a house, I got kids, I got people depend on me, right? Can I really give this? Yeah. So help me understand what was going through your mind.
So you're exactly right. On paper, I had everything that we all would work for. I don't say, I give a big caveat out of the gate here, because I'm not going to talk any specific numbers, but I was making way more money than I ever thought I'd ever make in my life. Way more than I ever sought out to make. And the more money I made, the more I realized I didn't really care about money. And it was something that I also felt like I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. Right. And I'll unpack that here in a second, because I'm going to come back to that. But I started out, so I was 10 years with Locked-In, and I was a K1 partner, and 3 other partners ended up joining within 12 to 18 months of me coming into Phoenix. But when I joined, it was $250,000 of revenue and 2 of us. And within 10 years, we built it to over 15 million and over 60 people in our office. The 4 of us partners in that local office really, really built it and embraced the pain so we can avoid the suffering of not knowing what was possible. And I think the more I went down that path, I know this is going to sound really bad, but I was just getting bored. It wasn't something where I felt like I was really having like profound and sustainable impact in people's lives. It was something that I could monetize. It was a high income yield job, and it was great. And I had ownership in my book, and so I was able to execute a buy sell and actually go down that path. But a few years back, I was dealing with some more health issues. A few years back, I got diagnosed with a really rare and extreme case of growth hormone deficiency. I had none in my body. So I had like extreme fatigue and cognitive dysfunction, which I've always identified a lot of my personal identity with my energy and my intellect, right? And so it really rattled me, and we ended up getting that figured out a few years back, and I've been on the right medication, and it's all supplemented. But what that really caused me to do was to realize that I was living a life uninspired. And although I was making more money than I had ever wanted, there was also other things missing. Because what I really care about more than anything is impact. And I really care about elevating and empowering people to do the things that they want to do. And I like other people's wins to be my wins. And I had started my human behavior and performance coaching and speaking business just over 5 years ago. So I was doing it on the side. And the more I spent time there, the more I wanted to spend time there. And the more I spent time there, the more I realized like the real impact I could have, because if I could work with a CEO, an entrepreneur, a business leader, even a high performing sales person, and help them break through some boundaries so that they're a better leader, a better person, can bring in a better culture, then really I'm not just impacting one person. I'm impacting the entire culture of who they're working with, their families, their friends, their everybody, right? To help them get out and break through those same boundaries. About a year and a half ago now, I guess, my wife and I had an amazing weekend. And it was one of those where like spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically, like on all 4 levels, like we were just in sync. It was one of the most phenomenal weekends we've had in 14 years together.
Were you at home or were you away?
No, we were doing a staycation, but we didn't have kids. So that was good because we didn't have the distraction of our little ones.
Okay.
And as we're going to pick up our kids, my wife looks over at me and she says, "How would you feel if you don't have to go to the office on Monday morning?" And I looked back at her and I said, "That's a pretty loaded question. Why don't you tell me more?" And she proceeded on to say, "I think you allowed this growth hormone thing to allow fear to enter into your world in a way that I've never seen you operate." She said, "I think you've convinced yourself that we need the money, that we need the security, that we need the financial freedom, that we need the prestige of your partner position in this role and having built it. And she said, and I'm here to tell you, we don't. She said, if we lived in a cardboard box, but you were happy and living the life that you wanted, she said, that's all I care about. So she said, I also think that every day you're in insurance, you're dying a little bit inside. And I think that you're not even scratching the surface of your potential or impact you want to make on the planet. So she said, we took a big bet on you once, right? Joining as a partner there was a high risk, high reward model. We paid ourselves on an interest-free loan that future revenues paid off. And its largest, my deficit was larger than the mortgage on my house. So I knew what risk was, right? It was a safer risk in that capacity than going and starting my own thing. But she said, we took a bet on you once and it paid off. I'm here to tell you that if you want to, we can double down on that risk.
Did you believe what she was saying about you right away, Brian? Were you feeling that same?
Yeah. I trust my wife more than I trust anybody on this planet. She threw a dart and hit the bullseye. She was way more clear in that moment than I was.
So you were feeling it, but you just weren't talking about it, maybe? Or
I don't even know that I was feeling it. I probably was feeling something, but I didn't know what it was. And when she said those words and the emotional triggers started going off around shame and doubt and fear and just flooded my body, I had to pay attention to it. She was right. And so and over the course of the few months prior to that, I had really started to unpack that shame had played a bigger role in my life than I had ever realized. And I don't know anybody who's listening, I am really thankful for stumbling upon Brené Brown and her work on shame, because what she helped me realize is the reason I didn't identify it in my life is because there's really two tracks to shame. The one I always thought there is the one where most people sit. It's you're not worthy, you're not good enough. And I've had moments in my life where I've experienced that, but very few, to be perfectly honest. It's just not how I've experienced stuff. But she said, when people are successful in shutting that down and they show up in the arena and they're ready to go to battle, the second narrative is, who do you think you are? So everything big I've ever done in my life, I felt the need to apologize for. So why would I venture off to go do something as audacious as I did, to go start this business full time and put 100% of my effort to really chase a mission around impacting 1 billion people over the next 25 to 30 years of my life? That sounds audacious. And my shame would have caught me and prevented me from doing it if I had not already unpacked and understood the role shame played in my life. It almost stopped me from doing it still. But I went through a pretty systematic approach of getting really thoughtful, really clear, doing a 7-year cash flow projection, understanding the root of all of my fears, what was holding me back, why would I do it, why wouldn't I do it? And ultimately, it came to a couple of things that were pretty clear to me. One, I will never teach my kids to hit the easy button. I will always teach my kids to chase the path that speaks to their heart the most. My actions will demonstrate that lesson to my kids. I also thought about regret minimization theory, which Jeff Bezos popularized. And it's that when you interview anybody at the end of their life, the things that they regret the most, it's the things they didn't do, not the things they did and failed. And I knew at that moment, like, I'm highly employable. If I fail miserably on this venture, I'll get a job. My family will be fine. And I had to put myself into that abundant mentality because that's true. I really genuinely believe I will be fine, right? And then I also had to look at the fact that over the prior year, I had lost about 6 men in my life. Not all of them were close to me, but I knew them or knew of them through a good friend of mine. I'd lost 6 men in my life to suicide. And I looked at this and said, if I can really help people, high performers or anybody, get through these blocks and barriers, understand their emotional triggers, understand their behavioral patterns, and bring joy, freedom, and fulfillment back into their lives, I might have the chance to just save somebody's life someday. And they may not be on the brink of suicide, but somebody who's making multiple 6 figures and is miserable in their life, that's saving their life if you can bring joy, freedom, and fulfillment back into it.
Yeah.
So, I feel like there's almost no greater thing I could commit my life to, which is just to help and impact the lives of other people. And that's what led to this whole process. It was my wife having the courage to push me and tell me something that she knew I needed to hear, not what I wanted to hear, and had the courage to recognize that the lifestyle we had built, this comfy, secure deal, to your point, that many people be like, great, I'm set, I can just ride this out. Guess what? That's true. I could have hit the easy button and the next 20 years of my life would have been mostly taken care of. But she said, nope, I want to do more for that. So that's not lost on me. It's a lot due to her.
And it sounds like she may have also sort of channeled this Brene Brown thing you were talking about, of like, who do you think you are? You know, if your wife sort of says, hey, I think this is who you are, there's a lot of confidence that comes with something like that, where if, you know, which is different than you think, you know, when someone else says it to you, it's like more of a endorsement or whatever.
And it rattled me. I didn't, you know, I wasn't like, she said this to me and it just like, it just clicked, right? I literally took 3 to 4 months of a lot of really intentional thought, gaining clarity on these things, having a lot of dialogue with my wife, and really unpacking this to make sure that it was the best decision for me and for my family and my kids and all the above. And the more data points that we hit on, the more it just seemed like a no-brainer. And so it was only a couple of months after she said it that I told my CEO and my COO that this was the plan and that I was going to go through a 9-month transition, because I wanted to leave everything at the standard that I've always set for myself on the way that I want to do stuff, and exited with grace. And it's at the moment, it's the best decision I've ever made.
And if you don't mind, I just want to back up for a second, because something that you said struck me as something that guys in particular would be sort of need a little bit more information on. You talked about your body not making growth hormone any longer. And that's something I haven't heard of. I know that growth hormone production
declines with age. Yep.
Declines because your brain senses that your body doesn't need it anymore because you're not building muscle or something like that is how it goes. But a lot of guys that I have had experience with, you know, they go to the testosterone, right? So it's like, oh, I'm feeling a little worn out, I got low T, but I haven't heard anyone talk to me at least about having had the condition you had. So how did it manifest itself, and how did you make the determination as to what it was?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And honestly, it took a few years to find it. I went through 7 specialists who did a battery of tests and told me I was perfectly healthy. It was a needle in a haystack. And when I say it's rare, and if anybody hears this and says that this stat is wrong, please correct me. But from the research that I've heard and from what my doctor told me, there's only like 6,000 cases in the US diagnosed every year. So it's pretty rare. And so we went through a whole variety of things. How it manifested was I just had crazy fatigue, and I've always had crazy levels of energy. So when I'm not having energy, having trouble getting out of bed, that's a pretty big indication for me. And I literally had cognitive dysfunction, brain fog. You and I could have a conversation and I'd leave the conversation and I completely would forget what we talked about.
Okay.
Nothing stuck. There was no memory recall. My ability to like articulate words, I can typically have words flow out of me relatively quickly. I often have to slow myself down in the way that I speak because it flows fast. That was not the case when I was struggling with this. It was like I was talking more slowly. The words weren't coming to my mouth. And so I was getting ready to give up on it. And I ended up landing with a naturopath who did a battery of tests. And this is the funny part, is that she's not the one who found it, but she put me on the path to find it.
Okay.
My body acidity was like way out of whack, like 4 times what it should have been. And so I started removing all acidic sources from my diet to try to help wherever I could. Well, one of the greatest influences of acidity in my body was coffee. I was at the time drinking about 1,000 milligrams of caffeine a day. And so we knew that was off. My I think it's ATAH and my testosterone were like right at the fringe of the ranges. They weren't like way off, but they were questionable enough that it was like, okay, I'm going to go see an endocrinologist, because that was the one specialist I hadn't seen. And he put me through a whole battery of tests. I was in his office every 2 weeks for 6 months. And, he literally went down the list of all the things that he thought it was, all this testosterone, thyroid. Everything that like all my symptoms would normally be. And we ruled them all out until we ended up finding growth hormone. And I've got a small tumor on my pituitary gland, which is where it also produces growth hormone. But also what's very common is growth hormone production goes out with head injuries. And I've probably had 6 TBIs, traumatic brain injuries.
Okay.
And so he thinks that was the case. Now, I had none in my body, which is also extremely rare. He said of all the ones that he's ever diagnosed, he's never had anybody have no growth hormone in their body. So he asked me point blank, when is the best, like when do you feel your best? And I said, after a cup of coffee. He said, you've been self-medicating for years. Well, when I looked back for the prior 5 to 6 years, I had incrementally increased my caffeine intake to keep my mental acuity and my energy on point. So today, now a few years removed, I literally have 1 cup of coffee every morning, just enough to get like kickstart my day. And I don't ever go back to it, because not increasing my caffeine also allows me to really understand and be aware of how my body is regulating everything.
Yeah.
And so I have been able to tell when my growth hormone levels are off based on the way my medication is going through, because I don't self-medicate that way. And I go see him now once a quarter to check all my levels anyway. So yeah, no, super rare. And I almost gave up and just kind of said, oh, well, this is it. But instead I finally found the solution, which was really good, because I'm back to normal.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think there's value there for a lot of people, even though it's rare. You just start thinking things are normal, right? Because I'm getting old or whatever. And it just pays to track down. Don't stop until you track down every possible lead.
Well, I think that's the lesson. I mean, I know mine is rare, but the reality of it is I do think that we know our bodies better than anybody else. And if something is off and we feel like something is off, trust it, right? And try to vet out, like, why? What is the source? What can I do to fix it? Where am I at? Because whether it's growth hormone or anything, it's something worthy to pay attention to. And this goes into my concept of embrace pain, avoid suffering, right? We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym every single day for 30 minutes to avoid the aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle and the suffering that'll manifest as a result of that. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of loveless marriage or being stuck in one that we ultimately want to divorce. We can embrace the pain of really turning in and going into the doctor because we know that we're off, to find the root source to heal, to avoid the suffering of a lifelong of not ever knowing and having literally our body manifest physically in a way that doesn't make sense. We can embrace the pain of going and seeing a therapist to heal ourselves emotionally from trauma or turmoil or anything, to avoid the suffering of being stuck there for the rest of our lives. What I really want people to take away from this is, like, we all have that choice to turn into those moments.
Right. And when you say, so I've heard you say this a number of times, not just today, but before, and I just want to sort of think through it a little bit more with you, if that's okay.
Please.
So I want to see if I have it right. So when you say embrace pain, avoid suffering, my mind goes to, if you embracing pain means that you're taking action to rid yourself of pain, right? So you're acknowledging that you have it. Well, you have two choices. You can either accept that it's painful and, like you say, live with that forever, or you can say, I'm going to actually I'm going to accept a little higher level of pain into my life right now, because doing so will help me avoid pain in the future. And is that what you're saying, or is that
Yes, but I think the big clarifier is that I think that we have, if we look at the definition of pain, it's short term, it's intermittent, and a direct cause of something. And it's alleviated once that direct cause is removed. And what we've done as a society is we've put clarifying words in front of it, like acute pain or chronic pain. To give ourselves a different definition, but it changes the definition. Anything that's not short-term, intermittent, and persists after the direct cause is removed isn't pain, it's suffering. And so that's the difference in the way that we think. So you're right. What I'm really trying to get people to do is to recognize that, firing our top salesperson because they're generating top-line growth might be really painful. But if they're also the greatest cancer in our culture, the suffering that's going to persist from our lack of ability to grow as a business and the number of other talented people we're going to lose because they don't want to be around them is suffering, right?
Yeah.
Because it's going to reach past that point. So I believe we can all choose our pain, or our suffering will choose us, right? Pain, we can choose. Pain is a choice. Suffering often creeps up on us without our ability or knowledge that it's even there, to the point that we adapt to it. And often until the impact is irreversible.
Yeah.
So what we really have to do is recognize the difference between pain and suffering. And we need to redefine the way we view pain, because otherwise we get stuck in feeling, oh, well, it's just painful. No, it's suffering.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus it's an excuse not to do something, right? If you see suffering as just part of the condition, then you basically have made a choice. You've intentionally avoided addressing it and instead chose to embrace it and make it a part of your life, even though you don't if you're asked, you wouldn't say, "Oh, I love this," right? You'd say, "This sucks," but
100%. And often it is. I mean, it is painful and it does suck. And going back to David Goggins, he put himself in pain often to avoid the suffering in other ways. Right. And I've never actually thought about this analogy as it relates to my guardian angel, but she embraced the pain of coming over and saving my life and delaying her day to avoid the suffering of knowing that she could have saved my life and didn't take action. And so had she seen on the news later that a 7-year-old boy died and she
so, can you imagine
a greater source of suffering knowing she could have done something and didn't?
I should have asked you too. How about the driver, the kid, the person that was trying to stop the vehicle? And did you ever make contact with?
We got a card from them about a week after the accident that just basically said, "We are so sorry," and that was all we ever heard from them. So,
okay, So you said something very interesting earlier when you talked about how you started your performance and coaching business while you were still employed at Lockton. And what you said was, what I think you said, and I'm paraphrasing, was you had learned through observing all of your clients, you had learned about, all these different ways that you could help people with things that they were missing, avoiding, whatever. And I thought to myself, that's really introspective, because most people, I think, and you can tell me I'm full of crap if you don't think so, but most people, I think, that are in that type of position, they realize the value that they're bringing to the relationship with their just years of experience and in what you're selling, but they may miss the fact that they've got all this sort of intellectual capital that they've built on observing all of these relationships that they could actually put to work in a different way, not selling the product or service anymore, but selling a different solution for a different issue that they've seen. And it seems like, how did you?
So I've been a student of, I would tell you that after my snowboarding accident, I just became a student of human behavior and performance, right? And human connection and vulnerability and authenticity and all of these things. And I studied it tactically with books, and I studied it with observation with people. And so it wasn't something where I necessarily just gleaned it from my professional world. I've done a lot of philanthropic work. And so board leadership and different things and interacting with different people in the community, and then just friendships. I think what I've just really learned is what and how to communicate with people, how to connect with people. And I think what became abundantly clear in my career as I started to come more into my own, right, and was really comfortable in just about any room that I walked into, is we're all people. It doesn't matter what we do, what product we sell, everything comes down to the human element and human connection. And so being a student of human behavior and performance, what I realized is all of the things you just identified is that I can have greater, more profound change if I can challenge the status quo, get somebody to think and act differently, break some bad behavioral patterns. And what was really fascinating is as I was doing this evaluation on potentially leaving to go build this full time, what I realized is over the last 18 to 24 months before I started looking at it, all of my top level client relationships, my biggest clients at the C-suite, I wasn't even talking to them about insurance. I was coaching them on how to be better leaders. Our team at Lockton was phenomenal. They did all the technical proficiency things on the risk management employee benefits side. And I didn't ever have to have those conversations because they were so good. And so what I did was build relationships, and I literally, all of my clients, I was coaching them. And when I started to realize that, it was like, well, if I'm doing this anyway, yeah, great, I could stay on this path. Yeah, great, I could keep this money coming in. But if I put 100% of myself into it, what could I do with it?
You said before the second part of shame was like the who do you think you are? And as you were telling that story, I was trying to put your story into my life, right? And I'm thinking to myself, well, I've had a decent amount of success in my life, but I still feel like, who am I to tell somebody how to be a better leader, or who am I to say what you're doing is, wrong or not working or could be better or whatever the right thing is. How did you deal with with that? How did you become okay with, well, this is what, this is the right thing for me to do?
Oh, so on my own lens, meaning for me, how did I get to a
'cause
point where I was okay just doing this?
Yes.
That's a good question. A lot of it probably had to do with my 2019 theme, which was around two things. It was around trust and surrender. I had to trust myself, my intuition, my gut, my focus, my intellect, my experience to recall on. And I had to surrender to the opportunities that were in front of me instead of trying to force the direction. That was a big awakening and a turning point. And I think when I first started my coaching business, it was that, who do I think I am? Like, I mean, literally, I got caught. I was like, who's going to hire me to help them? Right. I mean, literally, it was one of those where I was like, why would somebody ever hire me? Right. And it was because I don't know that I had given credit to a lot of the ways that I had actually developed as an individual, as a professional, as a leader. And I hadn't really come into my own. And that was, I mean, I had like imposter syndrome when I first started my coaching business 5 years ago and was doing it on the side. I was like, who's going to hire me? Like, who am I? Right. And then the more I did it and the more I realized that when I trusted and surrendered to what was in front of me, the cool part is I don't actually feel like I'm ever in a position where I'm telling somebody what to do. In fact, I typically am using their own words to allow them to see the misalignment in their own life. And so that is how I feel very confident, because I can talk to almost anybody in almost any industry, because what I focus on and what I'm an expert in is people. And so despite whatever I've done professionally, people is the common thread through everything on this planet. And if you know people, then you can have a discussion to really help them get clear on what's important to them. You know, I was just having a conversation with a very successful psychiatrist that specializes in trauma just this morning. I've built a relationship with her, done this stuff. She spent 30 years in this field, and she's heading into a different direction, trying to do some different things. And what was super fascinating is just through virtue of our conversation, she outlined and said to herself, basically, that she wasn't aligned in her actions versus who she was and the impact that she wanted to make. I never told her anything. All I did was say, hey, do you realize what you just said? And then strung together the 3 or 4 things that she'd said through the prior 30 minutes. And all of a sudden she was like, didn't even see it, right? So I think a really good coach isn't somebody that comes in and says, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, go do this and you'll be successful. That's not my philosophy. I personally think wherever I can help people, it's about helping them on an intrinsic journey to get super clear on the things that are important to them and recognizing that everything else becomes noise. And then they can build their life systematically in alignment so that it becomes self-regulating and they start to know what fits and what doesn't. I mean, I have another client that I worked with that has always hated conflict. And he was about ready to get absolutely bulldozed in a joint venture deal with somebody else. 9 months ago, before we were working together, he would have never stood up for himself. He would have just let it happen. And he called me on Friday. He's like, you won't even believe what happened. He said, I talked to him about the relationship that I want to build. I talked to him about the longevity of it, the impact, where we want to go. And then he said, and then I asked him, but you know what I'm not interested in? And the guy said, what? And he goes, getting effed. He stood his ground and the guy immediately leaned into it. But 9 months ago, his own shame wouldn't have allowed him to stand his ground for what he believed to be right. I didn't do that. He did. Right. And so I don't tell my clients what to do. I help guide them. I give them direction. But I think that was the moment where I was able to remove the imposter syndrome and who am I and why is somebody going to hire me? Because what I realized is my ability to help people get clarity for themselves is the gift I can bring.
Yeah.
It's what I can tell them to be successful.
Yeah. You make them the hero.
That's what it's all about. Because I want to empower and elevate my clients. I don't want them to be dependent on me. Right? If they're dependent on me, then I'm not actually giving them anything. They're relying on me. Then I can't impact 1 billion people if I've got 30 people dependent on me. I've got to get them through the system, elevated and empowered to go do this themselves. And then I can go touch more lives.
So let's go through the math on that, because I'm interested in touch 1 billion people is a big deal because there's only 7 some billion people, something like that. So how do you go about touching 1 billion people? What is your formula to accomplish that? And how will you know?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you said the math on that, because I know that Meltzer actually has math.
Yeah, I know. That's why I didn't want to throw his at you.
Okay, I'm okay saying that because mine is less calculated. Now his math I could steal and say that this is the equation that works, and I actually believe his math. It's the same thing that's going to work for me. It will not be 1-to-1. How am I going to impact 1 billion people over the next 25 to 30 years? It's going to be focusing one day at a time, one person at a time, one impact at a time. And when I do that, it will have a ripple effect that's going to reach many. There are also many times where I'm in a conversation where I'm speaking one to many, right? It could be on a podcast, it could be on a stage, it could be on any number of things.
Sure.
Anybody that's in that room that picks up one thing from me, that's a one-to-many scenario. If they repeat one thing I said to them, that's a part of my equation, right? So I was on a different podcaster on their show probably 4 or 5 months ago, and they just created a course. Well, they have a really big following. It's going to take off. It's going live here in a couple of weeks. Well, they referenced one of their modules on a concept that I talked about with them on the podcast, and they referenced me. Anybody who goes through that course is going to be a part of my billion.
Yeah, okay.
Ever be able to measure that billion? No, I won't. And I'm not even going to attempt to, because I genuinely believe if I focus on impact every day and determining if and how I can help every day, I'll hit 1 billion people in my life.
And I don't think it makes sense to focus on identifying the billions either, just to throw that in your corner, just to have that kind of, I call that a moonshot, right? Just to have that kind of a moonshot makes it more likely that it'll happen than all the counting you can ever do.
It's also big enough that I'm going to have to commit the rest of my life to do it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And you better live for a while, right?
I plan to. I mean, I have a healthy relationship with death, obviously, because of where it is. I know I could be done tomorrow, but if I commit myself to this every single day and I'm relentlessly consistent with the activities that get me there, I'm going to get close, or I'm going to hit it, or I may surpass it, and I may never know, but I'll know every day that I left it all out on the field.
How does a leader that thinks they could be better, how do they start a relationship with you?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's a lot of different ways, and it depends on what scale they want to reach. There's a lot of free content that goes out there. So I put out a lot of free content because I want to impact 1 billion lives. And I know damn well that there's not 1 billion people that are going to compensate me. So if I can put a lot of good into the world, so there's anything on my website is basically free, right? So brianbogert.com, it's got my Bogert's Bullets from my YouTube channel. It has all my social media feeds, has everything built in. So that's a great place to go. I'm at Bogert Brian on all social media platforms. And you asked the question, a lot of people say, oh, this all sounds great. How do we do it? Right? Can you help? And the reality of it is the answer is yes. Right. So I want to give something basically to everybody listening today. I've created a free resource that combines all of our coaching philosophies into a really succinct version to help people walk through that systematic approach on getting clarity in their life and building that life of alignment. And it's at nolimitsprelude.com. So anybody who knows who they are and thinks that they're great, but knows that there's some areas to get better, somebody who has no idea where to begin, or someone who's in between, this will be a valuable resource for you. And then if anybody's interested in getting a little bit more hands-on work, we have 2 different courses, a self-led version and a group coached version. And then I do a lot of one-to-one coaching as well. Clearly that's the most expensive of all of the alternatives, but that's where we get the deepest, most transformational work.
nolimitsprelude.com. Thank you for sharing that. So I've got one thing I want to ask you before we go, if that's okay. I've noticed several times since I'm watching you that you've got this tattoo on your right arm, sort of on the inside of your right arm, that's hard to miss. You're wearing a shirt that's covering most of it, but it's hard to miss. It's big. It looks like a clock. What's going on there?
So you are very observant. I think there's a lot that actually do miss it, and it's a detail. So the whole tattoo on the right side is a phoenix bird. And anybody who knows the history of the phoenix bird, they've risen out of the ashes and reinvent themselves time after time after time. Often after adversity or struggle, but they just reinvent themselves. And so I feel like I'm on version 58 of myself. I feel like I constantly rise out of the ashes and reinvent myself. What's funny is I don't reinvent myself to be a new version I reinvent myself to be a more authentic version of who I am. So every time I burn down, I'm actually shedding the layers. The inside tattoo is a pocket watch. And it is actually got the time and date of my accident. The story that's interesting and connected with that is, as I was getting ready to put it on my body, I asked my mom just to confirm the time. And she said, "Oh, like, are you going to do a pocket watch with the lens cracked?" I said, "Why would I do that?" And she said, "Because that's the moment time froze and life ended as I knew it." And this was a perspective moment for me, because I said, wow, no, I was actually going to have it be, because that's the moment my life began as I know it. And so for me, it's future focused and objective, but that also shows that the lens that we view something through can be extremely powerful. And so as soon as she told me that and the difference between the two, it was immediately inked onto my arm, because that's what it was. And you may notice behind me too, I've got a hanging pocket watch that also has the same time. And I've got that embedded into different elements in our course and different things, because it's obviously very important to me. So thank you for noticing, and thank you for asking.
Yeah, sure. My pleasure. And does your mom feel differently now that you've explained to her how you felt about it versus the way she was seeing it?
I don't know that she feels differently for her, but I think it was those same perspective moments for the two of us, right? I don't think that she realized that that's how I saw it. I didn't realize that's how she saw it. And it's proved to give some really meaningful discussion, actually, about perspective and the difference in how these struggles in life has patterned out for all of us, our whole family.
Well, Brian, this has been amazing. You've shared so much great stuff, not just about, the things that have happened to you, but what you've done with the things that have happened to you, and how you've taken all of that stuff and now figured out a way to impact leaders all over, and, ultimately 1 billion people, but leader by leader all over the world to see themselves as something more than maybe they see themselves presently. Like, their future is bigger than their past is something that comes to mind as I'm listening to what you're doing. So I applaud you. That's really fantastic work, and I thank you for it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for creating this platform, putting good into the world through other leaders. I know you've had other amazing guests on as well. And I think you're creating a platform for people to learn and grow from. And that's really what I desire. I want people to realize that they truly can live with no limits, and we're capable of far more than we give ourselves credit for. We got to put in the work, and we have to embrace the pain, but we're all capable of doing that. And that's really what I want people to realize is I don't care where you're at in life. I don't care what your background is, where you came from, what struggles you've had. Tomorrow's a new day, and we always have the opportunity to improve.
I live that. I try to live that every day, and it's just amazing to hear you say it, because it makes me want to do more than what I'm doing, and I think I'm doing a lot, and I want to do more after talking and listening to you. So connect with Brian. It's worth it. BrianBogert.com. I've begun watching your Bogert Bullets. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Bogert's Bullets. Yeah, thank you.
They're really good. Yeah, I'll talk to you more about that offline, but they're really good. I got a ton out of the few that I've watched so far. Yeah, you're doing it, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How Did Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How Did Happen podcast.